to say explicitly where it began to devolve, I would say, is you have a series of events that occur in the West, particularly Protestant Reformation, scientific enlightenment, enlightenment itself, scientific revolution, enlightenment. So all these three events, I think, are a cascading series of revolutions that really don't have much to do with Christianity. I would criticize Protestants in that they might have helped that revolutionary fervor. I don't think they necessarily meant to do that, but I would say that I know that I think Jake's tactic is to set the Protestants and the Catholics and Orthodox against each other. That's a classic Jake tactic, which I don't blame you for doing it because I did the same thing, right? So I was like, the Naim guy is like a Quran only, and they don't like each other. So I don't blame Jake for doing it. So it's what you do in debates. But again, I think that the Protestant Reformation has a revolutionary ethos to it that it even didn't intend, because of the fact that the earliest reformers were still monarchists. The English Reformation, even with Henry VIII as the so-called head of the church, I mean, it still was a monarchical structure of the state. Even the Vatican upheld this principle of the Christian state until the time of Vatican II. So, I'm not trying to take up the time, but the simple answer is there's a series of revolutions, and those revolutions affect the Islamic world just as much as the West. So, perhaps you could argue that Islam more explicitly maintained the belief that it should be, that God's law should apply to the state. I would agree with you. But I would not say that that's the consistent traditional Christian position. It happens to be the Protestant tendency, even though the first generation Protestants didn't really believe that.
Right. I'm not trying to do that.
By the way, this is also a side swipe argument against the Protestants. I mean, this debate is not about that, but Jake keeps kind of making these Protestant type arguments as if the biblical position of the New Testament is that there's no clear doctrine of the state, and Christianity doesn't care about the state and the social order. But you can show how silly the Protestant position is in this way, because the classical Reformation position, which I affirmed when I was Protestant, is that no, the state still has a duty to God and must be governed by at least some theocratic, biblical, theonomic principles. But today's Protestantism, especially post Roger Williams, severs the relationship of God to the state, right? So you went from separation of church and state to severance of church and state to severance of God from society, and God is then only related to your sort of personal private devotion, which is ridiculous, but that's 99% of today's Protestant world.
A bad way.
And by the way, that shows you that Protestantism is absolutely fallacious and unable to speak to society. It only can ultimately speak to the individual salvation. And literally the only Protestants that are left that still think that there even is some, Christian doctrine of the state are the followers of Bonson and Van Til, which are like 0.01% of Protestantism.
Believe that narrative. I believe the narrative that this was an outgrowth of Protestantism. I mean, I think when you have sola scriptura, which is essentially a denial of the church's authority to preach and teach what is the correct understanding of Scripture, and then you make yourself that authority, this sort of...
So here's Jake starts making a bunch of Protestant, like anti-Protestant arguments, which is like, well, that just helps my position, dude. Sure.
Individualism, rightly, or not rightly, but naturally leads to... I'm not saying there are obviously links in the chain along the way, sure, but I'm saying that I think this Protestant doctrine of sola scriptura, and in its crudest form, just me and my Bible in my closet, eventually leads to, well, not only do you not want Rome to tell you what is the understanding of Scripture, you don't want any legislative authority over you to be governing by laws that they see as Christian when you don't agree with that. And so I think it is an eventual natural outgrowth of Protestantism and the doctrine of sola scriptura, which leads to this kind of fundamental...
Yes, thank you for helping to refute Protestantism, Jake.
...societal individualism that we experience in the West. I don't think anybody should deny that, especially if you're not Protestant. So I'm not using that as a gotcha. I genuinely believe that was the trajectory. However, I want to give the Protestants a little bit more credit in saying that, well, I don't think that this happened.
Now, for those of you bringing up Spain and the recent, Islamic invasion, again, Spain has had a constant centuries-long back-and-forth battle with Islam, obviously, right, over this issue. And part of the problem is the Roman Catholic theological positions, which used to be very obviously anti-Islamic, to their credit. Well, if Vatican II says that you all worship the same God, and if Gaudium et Spes says that it's chain migration, open borders, which it says, and if Pope Leo has said many times over, welcome all the migrants, then obviously the problem is, and not just that, Roman Catholicism post-Vatican II has negated and surrendered the Christianization of the state. It literally says many times over, freedom of religion, freedom of conscience, freedom of worship, no more Christian states. In fact, the Vatican years ago even said it's time to de-Christianize these European states. This is the end result of that. And by the way, Fuentes admitted this again the other day on X. The very thing that I've been saying to him for like a decade. And he's admitted twice now that, yeah, this is correct. Well, then there's no reason really to be disagreeing with me. So let me find that. Here it is. Here's him saying it again. So, and he's probably said it more than this. I think I've even seen at least 3 clips where he's admitting this principle. And I know that Nick focuses on geopolitics and politics, but the main issue of disagreement with me stems back 10 years ago to the theological issue of the Vatican. And I've been saying for 10 years since we had that debate, it's not just a theology nuance thing. The papacy, if it is erroneous and if it is a deviation, then it becomes a tool of geopolitical machination. And you can see it, as I've been arguing for so long, in the way the Vatican promotes the destruction of Christian Europe.
Got the machine guns. Western Civ may have already fallen.
Yeah, seriously, man. It's so over. I wish we could just drop bombs on those people, man. I wish America would just go in with F-35s and just drop bombs on those people. If that's not an invasion, then what the fuck is an invasion? 40,000 people run through the gates, running through the streets, breaking into houses. If that's not an invasion, then what is? Why do you even have a military? What's the military for? If we got invaded by another country, it wouldn't even look like that. If we got invaded by China, it wouldn't even look like that. Yeah, there would be Chinese soldiers in the streets, but it wouldn't be a full-scale replacement, kicking down doors and setting cars on fire. That is a ethnic cleansing. So yeah, I just wish Trump would go in with the B-2s and just light them up.
Toilet Broy % $20. Francisco Franco, if you can hear me, please save Spain from the Islamic invasion.
Seriously. And unfortunately, the Pope is going to sit around and say, well, we need to be humanitarian with these.
But I got to understand, it's not just Leo or Francis's opinions. It's not just their political opinions. These people keep ignoring, or they're not aware of the fact that Vatican II has a geopolitical dogma, a geopolitical statement, a stance. It's called Gaudium et Spes. And the whole document is about essentially a United Nations attitude of a new world order. It actually uses that terminology, that a United Nations structure of global governance is the ideal, is the model. And we need to de-arm the nations. De-armament is what it calls for. It calls for the end of capitalism, and I have critiques of monopoly capitalism, but what they want is some form of weird gay socialism, which would obviously be a nightmare. And it calls for chain migration in Gaudium et Spes. Don't you understand? This is the official, since Vatican II, geopolitical stance of the Vatican. And everybody just acts like, well, no, this is just Leo's private opinion. He's a political lib. No, it's not just being a private political lib. It's the position of Gaudium et Spes, the Vatican II document. I knew about Gaudium et Spes 25 years ago, 26 years ago. It was one of the first things that I grappled with as a Roman Catholic. I don't even think 99% of the Roman Catholics know what it is. So it's not just the Pope's private political opinions. All of the Vatican II popes have had the same geopolitical stance because of Gaudium et Spes. They can't go back on that. They can't just, oh, by the way, sorry, we were wrong for the last 70 years on our normative, ordinary, political, papal normative teaching. By the way, it doesn't, whatever status, Gaudium et Spes is not infallible. So what? You still have to, according to Canon 752, follow the non-infallible teaching with submission of intellect and will. It doesn't even matter what the status of it is.
People. Really? What is their obligation? What is anyone's obligation? You notice it's only the white people that have an obligation? Our countries are being invaded. Our culture is being destroyed. Our society is being ripped apart. Not theirs. They're fine.
Yeah, and the papacy is one of the massive facilitators of that. That's why, even from the geopolitical standpoint, you could disprove the papacy. Even if we set aside all these key arguments and this and that, just on the vantage point of it being a destruction to Christian civilization, well, is that what Jesus wanted? Did Jesus set up an infallible normative office of a geopolitical world ruler that's there to destroy the church? I mean, that makes no sense.
They will always have a home to return to. Our home, that's our home that's being invaded and destroyed. That's the birthplace of our culture is being destroyed. But we always have the obligations to everybody else. They
Well, it's partly the birthplace of Filioque, but
have no obligations. They have no, how about they get their own fucking drinking water? You want to talk about obligations? How about they have their own clean drinking water? How about they grow their own food? How about they police their own streets and kill their own terrorists in the Sahel? How about they do that? And how about they stop invading our countries? How about their governments keep their people from fleeing into our countries because theirs are so miserable? But it's always, when these people are here wrecking everything, we have to restrain ourselves, removing them. I'm getting really tired of that.
dude, how ridiculous is it for all these Roman Catholics? I'm not talking about Nick, but I'm just saying in general, the audience that put on the PFP and the LARPing Crusader outfit as if they're Crusaders when their infallible head has for 70 years taught that you worship the same God as the Muslims. They pray in mosques, dude. The popes pray in mosques all the way back to John Paul II. John Paul II had his famous Jordan address where he says, "May St. John the Baptist protect Islam." Not the people of Jordan, Islam, the false religion.
Hypocrisy or double standard. And it comes from the Catholic Church, and it's not cool. I'm sick of
This is what I've been saying. So this is essentially, I appreciate Nick's honesty on this point. So this is admitting the main thing that I keep saying for 10 years. Like, there's no reason really then to disagree.
hearing that. He goes to Lampedusa and says, you know, we have an obligation to these people. Well, that's just disgraceful. You go to the site of this invasion and say, well, we got to be nicer to them. Well, the reason they're coming here is because their country
Why did the Vatican build the Leonine Wall if they have an obligation to let all these people in? And by the way, are any of these people let into the Vatican? Of course not.
is a shithole. Why don't you go there? You want to talk about human dignity? Okay, why don't you go there then? The reason they're coming to Italy is because they're poor and miserable and their countries are violent. So you want to be brave.
Yeah, a bunch of garbage Islamic societies. But this is supposed to be, according to Jake, the best thing for society, right?
Even go to Lampedusa and say, hey, we got to be nice to these people. We got to treat them with dignity. Why don't you go to the Congo and give them the lecture on human dignity? Why don't you go to Uganda and Nigeria and give them the lecture on human dignity?
People are making the joke Vatican III written by the rabbis. Nostra Aetate was already written by the rabbis, openly.
And then maybe their people won't be fleeing and invading our countries looking for a fucking handout. It's sick. Anyway, people say he's the ant.
So this is what I've been arguing. So 10 years later, thank you, Nick. I appreciate you coming around. This is what we've been saying.